Christians love casting shade at Gnostics. I've been called a Gnostic before, which I'm not, by the way. I repudiate Gnosticism. Why? Gnosticism is the idea that you can just attain the right knowledge and that somehow will save you. When you go so down the way of like, it's works don't matter, it's only faith, that starts to become Gnosticism, because it's like what I say and believe about this religion, what I say and believe about Jesus is what's the most important thing. That's just all mental. What do you do about that? How does that flow? And I think that's to your point about why is it important to know about this lineage of Jesus in this, because it is the way.
I just got goosebumps.
It is. Yeah. What would Jesus do? What did he do? What did he live? Who really was he? And if we're meant to, as he says in our Greek Gospels, to go on and do even greater things than he, what things?
Talking about our beautiful memories of dodgeball as children.
It was a great lead-in too, because
it was, man,
because
phenomenal.
Death of Recess.
Yeah.
So what were the highlights? The highlights were dodgeball is gnarly.
We were just talking about dodgeball. So when I was a kid, we had those like plush dodgeballs, the ones that were soft, but they could also concuss a sixth grader if you really got it ripping.
Totally.
I mean, we were quite violent. And so I was just asking if you ever played dodgeball. Did you ever have that?
Dodgeball is blood sport, bro. We're going to talk about like peace and nonviolence today, but I'm going to tell you that I was violent with some dodgeball.
Yeah. What would Jesus do? What would dodgeball? I don't know. Would Jesus play dodgeball, do you think?
I mean,
with the soft ones?
I take it that he might have had a little bit of like some competitive edge. I mean, look at the way he faced up the Pharisees.
Right.
Like, he definitely would have knocked some Pharisees.
Dude, he would have cooked a Pharisee with the dodgeball 100%.
And
shots.
And I was telling you, like, we had this next level dodgeball where I came from, where they called it crab soccer, which is you use the big versions of the dodgeballs, blow up, but like this big, and we would get on all fours, but with belly up, like crawling on the ground, like crabs. And the thing is you would go and you would kick that thing and it would get up in the air, and it had some weight to it. And if it hit a kid's in the head coming back down, there's no way to like brace the impact. So the head would just, would be
clapping the cement or the gym floor.
The gym floor. We'd be like on the hard gym floor, and people would be like, it would take people out,
stretchered,
go to the nurse.
Well, that's why I'm making a film called The Death of Recess. You've got your film called Christspiracy. But I was just reflecting. I mean, it's like I kind of understand why Recess was taken away. It's violent. I don't really get into that in the film.
Yeah.
But yeah, now everybody's suing everybody. So like if anyone gets hurt, if their kid gets hurt, they're suing the school. Like they're going after the school. And I'm like, you got to have a little danger in life.
Yeah.
When you're swimming in the ocean, you ain't suing what are you suing out there, buddy?
Right. Yeah.
Nothing to sue. So you gotta have a little friendly danger.
Right.
My vote is schools got to have some sort of maybe you sign a liability waiver. Maybe they do that now for kids.
Yeah.
But a lot of schools have taken away recess. They're like, no. And I look back, it's like crab soccer, man. That got your shoulders probably jacked.
Got your shoulders jacked.
And you're exercising, you're outside. Now you see like the obesity. 1 in 5 kids thought about killing themselves last year. That's a CDC stat.
Wow.
And like recess is down from 2 hours in 1950 to 25 minutes today, average in the U.S.
Jeez.
So it's like, man, bring back dodgeball.
Bring back dodgeball.
Make dodgeball great again.
You got to test those limits, bro. When you're a kid, you gotta push up against. It's such a great way to get that aggression out. You and Tommy got some choice words over the crayons. It changes when the dodgeball comes out.
Take it outside. Take it out. Yeah, hit the dodgeball court.
Yeah,
it's true, man. It's true. That's why I love documentaries, and that's why I love your documentary in particular. I mean, documentaries for me. So you and I met 9 years ago, and we really bonded over the fact we were both making documentaries, and I just love the ability, we were talking about this, to question things in the world. And when we question things, it either reveals to us that our beliefs are not based on anything sturdy, and it will also strengthen beliefs that are true.
Right.
So I think questioning things I always encourage people to question things. And I've found people that are, disincentivizing you to question the system or question authority are often the ones that are manipulating people for power. And so documentaries are like one of the greatest tools in society to challenge authority and to question things. And I feel like that's what Christspiracy has done so well, and it's really caused me to widen my horizons and start to question what of my beliefs are rooted in really solid fact and truth, and which ones are there some nuance, which ones should we have conversations about. And I think that's really what you're doing, is you're not trying to throw things out. You're trying to question things and bring about a greater understanding of truth. And I've gotten a lot of questions that I want to go over from skeptics that have watched Christspiracy, that have watched your debate with Wes Huff, and have seen you on maybe Piers Morgan and seen all the content that you're putting out. So I want to ask questions with you that maybe some of those are challenging, and some of the maybe more traditional Orthodox or Catholics that have watched your film that still have questions. Maybe we can dive into some of those.
Absolutely.
But first off, I would love to hear from your perspective. Why do you think it's important to question things, and why did you make Christspiracy from that lens of questioning, biblical truths or biblical history?
Right. Well, coming from the central figure of Jesus, which is a lot of what Christspiracy is based on, Christ and his story and the temple and everything going on at that time is like a through line of the film. And so much of it is built around questions. Christ, Jesus, he is notable in his questioning. So oftentimes throughout the Gospels, Jesus, he answers questions that people are challenging him with more questions. He uses questions as answers. And, this is the bedrock of the philosophical school with Socrates, to pull the truth out from within. I actually learned from Death of Recess this idea of education, which is to actually, right, it's to draw out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The word education comes from the Latin word educo, which means to draw out from or to develop from within.
Right. And so questions, like you said, are so important, not only because they help us get to the capital T truth that, out there, misinformation, whatever, we got to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. It helps you reinforce your own capital T truth within. If you are on the right path, it just further reinforces it. But it's really important too that, like, when people are coming together with two different viewpoints, you mentioned my debates that I've had and everything, no one is ever going to really own a capital T truth that's discovered unless they feel like they have some ownership over that discovery. And if I'm sitting here and you and I are having a conversation and I'm just drilling information into you, you're not going to have ownership over that information as much as if I asked you questions and you, even if I know where those questions lead, you going on that journey allows you to actually have ownership over that information and feel like that there's something that you've come to in your own conclusion. I think that's why it's so important to do that with children and for us as a society to do it, because then we feel like we've come to that conclusion ourselves and it's not someone just telling us or forcing us to believe that, right?
Yeah, it's encouraging. That our whole education system is really based on the opposite. It's like it's an authority figure telling us what to learn. Not everybody goes through that, but the majority of people go through that traditional factory model of education. So over the years, we slowly become almost like encouraged not to ask questions, not to question. We see that in society. It's like, here's the mandate. You all have to do this. And now we're living in a time where that's changing.
Yeah.
The public is waking back up to, hey, actually, we're the ones that are supposed to have the power here. You're not the ones supposed to be telling us what to do. But that only comes through questioning.
Yeah.
And when you question things, you get down to it. I just pulled up, Jesus asked, there's a source here saying 305 questions just from Jesus alone in the New Testament.
Questions dominate Jesus's answers. There's something funny about questions. When you think about even just the punctuation mark of a question, and then you think about a statement as a period or an exclamatory statement, an exclamation point, I'm telling you this. it's very rigid and straight up and down. It's very masculine, point to point, with the exclamation point. The question mark is a little more feminine. It's a little more inviting and so a question as an answer is like combining a statement and a question together. It's the interrobang, like the Riddler from, if you remember, the Riddler used to wear it on Batman, and it's because the Riddler used to drive Batman crazy, right? Because he would do these questions, but it's this way of, it's a chink in the armor of the system to make sure that the system's correct, or to bring down the house of cards if it's not. Unfortunately, to your point about power, those who question have had a challenging time over history. Socrates, who I mentioned before, he was given hemlock poison and killed, and Jesus,
Ron Burgundy. I'm Ron Burgundy. Yeah, everybody.
Milk was a bad choice.
You can also see that, part of whether you want to call it like the devil or the darkness is to also confuse people. It's also to get people in that state of questioning. So I think that's where maybe some of the skepticism is coming from to the film, which we can start to dive into. Is, hey, why are you questioning this? Or it can be scary to get into that in between space, but maybe share, how did this all start? You started questioning, you grew up in the South. I love your come up story. And, what questions did you start asking that got you to this point where you decided to make a full documentary and spend a decade of your life dedicated to this?
Right. Well, it really goes back to my childhood and being raised in the American Bible Belt South in Augusta, Georgia, the home and birthplace of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the second largest Christian organization behind the Vatican. Most people don't know that, but
wow,
the Southern Baptists, they get out there.
They get to it.
And I was raised in that tradition, ministers and gospel singers and everything in my family. And then I followed suit by becoming a career gospel musician myself into my 20s. I toured around the world playing music and worship music, writing worship music, got signed by Sony Records, writing worship music. But when I was 17 years old, there was a question that began to build within me that built over time until around the time we met in 2017, which is right when I started this film and really locked in on this journey. But it started in 2017 when I did what's called the Daniel fast, which is this biblical-based fast that became popularized, especially when I was in high school, by Rick Warren, who wrote Purpose Driven Life. He was a part of the Oprah Book Club and this and that, but it was like a Protestant version of Lent or something, because Protestants don't really do anything like that. But once a year, my family and I would do a 10 or a 21-day Daniel fast where we actually abstain from eating all animal products, alcohol, soft drinks, sugar, everything, just simple fruits, veggies, a little bit of bread, and water. And the reason why is because that's a mirror of the story of Daniel, the prophet. In the text, it says that when he's enslaved in Babylon, he's a Hebrew that's taken from his homeland and into slavery in Babylon. And he was kind of an intellectual slave. He wasn't like a worker slave. He was really adept and really smart, he and his brothers. So Nebuchadnezzar had him, like his slavery was reading text and orating and trying to glean the knowledge from his kingdom. So in part of that, they gave them the best food because they were the intellectual slaves, and the best food was the king's food of a bunch of meat, like steak dinner,
meat, wine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Daniel, first things first, in chapter 1, he actually refuses that food. He says, "I don't want that. Just give me vegetables and water." And Nebuchadnezzar's, his seer over him is like, "Yo, you can't do that. Like,
if you eat the filet mignon, buddy.
Yeah, eat the filet mignon. I can't have you getting sick, man.
The master about this
you need
one.
To get your protein, boy.
Yeah,
we
need you to thank."
And so, but he says, "No, just no worries. Just test me for 10 days and see how I fare against the other slaves and even the warriors in the kingdom." And after 10 days, Daniel tests healthier, wiser, and stronger, it says, than all the king's men in the kingdom. And he even starts to interpret dreams that the king has that no one else can interpret in the king's court. And so Daniel gets promoted to like the right-hand man. But he's also like, so powerful that he becomes a threat, and they end up, famously, Daniel in the lion's den, they throw him to the lions, and the lions don't eat him, and they throw him in the furnace, and the fire doesn't burn him. And so Daniel was kind of like a superhero for me when I was growing up. I grew up on Bible stories as like superheroes before Star Wars and Marvel and all that. And at 17 years old, I awakened to this idea that I had missed when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I didn't know about the diet part, the fast part. But at 17 years old, I find out, oh yeah, there's all these, Protestants that are following this fast, and you pray. And so it was just a way for me to draw closer to God. But what I didn't realize is how much the actual food aspect was going to affect me. And I started to notice some of those benefits, the healthier, feeling more robust, feeling like mental clarity, all these things. So I just kept going on that fast over time. And then that started to rise a question out of me, because at the same time, my mom, who was an insurance sales lady, she went to go audit a chicken farm, and she came back home explaining like how dirty and horrific it was, the conditions these chickens were in down south in some of these really dark warehouses where they raise chickens. And she was so affected, she started taking the chicken out of the fridge and was like, I don't want to eat chicken anymore. And then that turned into, I don't want to eat beef anymore or anything. And this was a problem at my house, by the way, because just so everyone knows, I was a massive meat eater. Like, I went fishing every year offshore in the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America.
Gulf of America now.
To catch grouper, snapper, the whole deal, 40 miles offshore. I was a hunter. I was a part of a Christian youth hunting club, bow hunting, rifle hunting, everything. And my stepdad owned a barbecue restaurant, which I helped a little bit, but I also ate a lot of. So it was a challenging time for me to do the Daniel fast. It wasn't easy for me, but over time I started to notice that there was more there that I needed to discover. And a lot of that went into the actual scripture, and like, well, if Daniel was doing this, does this reflect anything else in the Bible? Because I've always heard like kosher laws and animal sacrifice, and I was raised, God gave us animals to eat. And also we had a prayer that we used to say, a short prayer, like kind of a joke. Good food, good meat, good God, let's eat.
Good God, let's eat. Yeah,
right?
We said that one too, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like I was raised on that, but this seemed to have a little bit of like a, it was in the other direction. And so I just started to question, I wonder if there's more to that. And that eventually led to the ultimate question of the film. Well, Daniel did this, these scriptures say that. What would Jesus do? And that's, I have the bracelet here. You have one.
Yep, I got there. A little frayed.
Famous,
a little weathered.
Christian nostalgia. What would Jesus do bracelets? They popped on the scene in, when I was a young kid, and they went super viral before there was even Instagram or anything like that. And even as a kid, man, like I was telling you on the chat before we lost the audio, that on recess at my school, I used to pass these around to my kids, and we created a little WWJD club where we would ask each other moral questions. Like, what do you do if you find a wallet on the playground? Do you give it to your teacher? Do you keep it for yourself? What would Jesus do? And we would all test each other to see like how we would handle things morally, with Jesus being the ultimate moral standard. So as an adult, now that I've got this question with the chicken battery cages, and also how I feel abstaining, but I also love meat, and then I start to think about, I've been eating it, but I haven't really been thinking about where it's coming from. Is there a right way to do that? Is there, what would Jesus do? So that's how the question started, and then it went way down a rabbit hole that I never realized it was going to go down. And to your point about just asking questions, that was our film. If you watch our film, no matter if someone walks away from the film even disagreeing with stuff, we always have people telling us, man, I really appreciate the way you guys approached it. I feel like you were just asking questions. I feel like you didn't force anything down, and by the end, you're leaving the viewer to make the decision or come to the conclusion about what they think. So that's really been the goal the whole time, is just to ask questions.
To sound off on that point, that's one of the reasons why I love the film so much. I would encourage everyone to go watch Christspiracy just from that lens. The greatest documentaries ask questions, ask the best questions. And you traveled the world asking questions. You went to the Vatican, you went, to some of the world's greatest biblical scholars asking this question, and it really reveals, common through lines and common threads. Before we jump into that, one little tangent. I know some people will say, Daniel, for instance, he was only fasting for 10 days because he was a Pharisaic Jew, and so he would have stuck to Mosaic law. And so the 10 days he was just refusing to eat the king's meat because it wasn't sacrificed, in a clean way. It didn't, fit to Mosaic law. So, do you think that was just a 10-day fast and he went back to eating meat? Or do you feel, or is there any evidence showing that he was like maybe possibly a lifelong vegetarian? Or
Right.
why would was there any other possible reason that he did that fast, do you think?
Right. Well, I believe he was a lifelong abstainer from animal flesh and wine too, by the way, like alcohol. But before I even show why, what I will say is, let's just grant if he was, actually just following standard Jewish law, kosher and everything, and he's just trying to avoid this. Even at face value, this is still pointing to that this fast is the ideal, because what he's doing is he's pantomiming the Garden of Eden. Eden in Genesis chapter 1 says in 1:26 through 28 that we have dominion over the animals, and everybody, including myself and how I was raised, believes that means we can do what we want with them and then we can use them for food and this and that. But then in Genesis 1:29, the following verse after the dominion mandate, which is really the first commandment, be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over the animals, included in that commandment is, and I will give you herbs bearing seed and fruits bearing seed for food. That's the diet prescription in the following verse after dominion. So in a way, Daniel's pantomiming this even just for a period. So it's pointing to an ideal, which is the same ideal, which we can talk about later in the podcast. I'm sure we'll get there, of the kingdom of heaven to come that Jesus ends up revealing. However, I think it goes deeper than that. And the reason why I think it goes deeper is because, number one, if you read the text, it clearly says that this is 10 days is the test time. It's the length of the test. It's not the length of the fast. So it's not saying that he only ate that way for 10 days. It's saying he was tested for 10 days. And at the 10th day, they came in and he was healthier, stronger, and wiser. It doesn't say that he necessarily stopped, right?
Correct.
But there's even more context, and that's this. There's a famous historian named Josephus, who is the historian of Jesus's era. And you name the apologist or theologian that is pressed, when pressed on the existence of Jesus, because many people will disagree, there is no person that existed of Jesus, and why they think the number one evidence usually put forth is from Josephus and his testimonium, where he talks about the crucified man and all of this. And that same record, that historian that we hang our hat on for the existence of Jesus, also wrote about Daniel. And he wrote about Daniel utilizing the commentary of his day and what people were saying about him, which gives context to the scripture that we have now. And so you can pull up really quick.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at, Daniel 1, 8 through 16. It says, Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor the wine which he drank. And then it says, thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and wine and gave them pulse. Mm-hmm. And you were describing, what is pulse?
So pulse is like an Old English term for a seed-bearing plant. So vegetables and fruits, basically.
And, okay, so in Daniel 10, 2-3, Daniel himself writes, I ate no pleasant bread, neither came flesh nor wine in my mouth.
Right.
Now, I don't know if, from what I'm seeing, there's really not too much, there isn't like a defined yes or no. Mm-hmm. It's, nobody really, I guess, has a historical record of what he did his whole life. I mean, this is a 6th century BC prophet, but I feel like that's a juicy question because we don't really know.
Right.
But you were saying Josephus could have possibly mentioned that he was...
Yeah, so if you pull up Josephus on Daniel, I could even you can read it or I can read it. I pulled up just a second ago there.
Let me bring it back here. Let me know where you had it. I don't know if you had it up on a ChatGPT or Google.
I pulled up the OG text, boy.
Yeah, the OG. Pull it up.
There we go. So you can read.
Feel free to read it so we can have it.
So this is Josephus, and it's chapter 10 from his, let's see, this is the book, Antiquities of the Jews, book 10. And if you go to chapter 10 of said book, In the second paragraph, it says, "Now Daniel and his kinsmen had resolved to use a severe diet and to abstain from those kinds of foods which came from the king's table in its entirety, and to forbear to eat of all living creatures." So the way it's framed in the Bible, it's saying, give me vegetables. This is going even further and saying, I don't want to eat living creatures, is the way that Josephus is framing it here. So he came to Ashpenaz, who was the eunuch who came to care for them, and was committed and desired him to take and spend what he bought for them for the king, but to give them pulse and dates, the fruit, dates.
Which were widely available.
The
ancient world. There.
For their food, and anything else besides the flesh of living creatures that he pleased. For, this is the key point, for that their inclinations, meaning Daniel and his brothers, for that their inclinations were to that sort of food, pulses and dates, and that they despised the other,
wow,
the flesh of living creatures.
Wow.
So that to me points to a great,
it's not just about, it being ritually impure, because that was also, that's kind of a skeptical perspective, is that, well, you can't eat any of their food because they're sacrificing it to pagan gods or pagan idols.
Right.
So why would he say, oh, I can eat your fruit?
Right.
Wouldn't it be also unclean coming from the king?
Yeah. Well,
they
would
that's
be
just the way I would see that.
In a greater sense.
You would reject all food coming from the king.
Yeah, because a lot of...
I could be wrong with that, but especially what you're reading with
it's
Josephus, it seems that way.
We even see that in the story of Jesus when he's sitting with the tax collectors and the Pharisees and everything's in Gentiles. He's not supposed to do that as like a card-carrying Jew. That's dirty. These people, you don't know if they've ever washing their hands. You don't know what their ritual purity laws are and all this. You don't know what God they just prayed to before, and so you're not even really supposed to do that. So to your point, yeah, that's a great point. Like, Daniel doesn't know if the fruits or the pulses have been sacrificed to some, because they sacrificed grain and everything as well. He doesn't know what they're hand washing, all these other kinds of things.
And I guess let's dive into why is this significant in terms of, this is a 6th century BC prophet. So I guess, could you educate me? This is where, I'm not too studied, but why is Daniel an important figure in biblical history when it comes to, as we transition to Jesus? Right.
Well, Daniel talks a lot about the Son of Man prophecy. He has prophecies leading towards and alluding to a Messiah to come, like Jesus. He's also who a lot of people are quoting when they're quoting end times prophecies. I mean, that's a hot topic these days with everything going on in the world. People talking about Armageddon and all of this. So much of that comes from Daniel. He was very prophetic in his kind of eschatology, if you will.
Yeah, we see Daniel as one of the key prophetic sources in the Hebrew Bible for foretelling the coming of the Messiah.
Exactly. So super important.
Quite important when you're looking at that framework of, especially in the world today. I mean, that's such a critical question with our faith.
Yeah.
Not everybody agrees that Jesus was the Messiah.
Yeah.
So when we have those biblical, precursors,
right,
that builds the case of Christ being the Messiah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in a lot of ways, Daniel is this... He is this like pre-archetype of what's to come. He's a building. All the prophets build on each other, and he's one of the later ones because he's fully enslaved in Babylon, but he keeps his purity and he keeps his way to God. The Bible's full of stories of people being righteous and then falling from grace and going through it. He's one of the few that really holds his ground.
Wow.
So that's interesting too.
That's beautiful. I think that helps give us some context. And backtracking, I think a lot of people will say, okay, Cam, you just said in the book of Genesis, God gave us dominion over the animals. Mm-hmm. That's pretty clear. I think you would see, in most Christian communities, we're like, okay, that means that we get to dominate or control the animals. God gave us rule over that. So what would you say to the person that says, hey, it's pretty clear in Genesis that God gave us dominion over the animals?
Yeah. So again, reading it at face value, dominion is granted Genesis 1:26 through 28. That's the verses that outline God says, be fruitful and multiply to the humans, and I give you dominion over the birds of the air and the fish of the sea and the beasts of the earth. And then in the following verse, the verse right after that command is Genesis 1:29, which says, and herbs and fruit and vegetables shall be yours for food. So clearly, herb eating dominion is not a license for tyranny. That's one of my favorite lines, actually, from theologian and professor Dr. Andrew Lindsay, who's one of our key characters from our film. I remember he said that, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah, he's got a British accent. Herb eating dominion is not a license for tyranny, you know? And it really lands. It's like, yeah, okay, so that's one layer. But then let's actually look at the study of the word behind the word dominion, the original Hebrew. And I know we've talked a lot about this, like being raised in America as American Christians, we're like, oh yeah, Bible, God speaks in the King James, like it's like you forget
that.
You
think God's got a southern accent, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, I know, and in a lot of churches, there's a lot of controversy with what did Jesus actually look like? Some
Right.
churches there's a Caucasian
Right.
Jesus, some
Right.
got a black Jesus. It's like we got a little bit of, it's like Jesus takes on some different forms in Western society.
He does. And then the language of God's word takes on many forms. And so that's the big question is we're talking about it in English, but these texts in the Old Testament were written in Hebrew, often Paleo Hebrew, and then eventually translated to Greek, the Old Testament. But our New Testament's only written in Greek in terms of the manuscripts that we have for our current canon, but behind it, which we can get into, there's all kinds of remnants of Aramaic and Hebrew remnants and all of this. And so you've got this understanding that it's really important to go back to the original languages and go down the line to the oldest and really try to understand, is there anything we're missing about the nuance here about what's being said? And that's present with dominion. So
over the past few years, I didn't even know Jesus spoke Aramaic as his primary language until a few years ago.
Right.
Seriously. I had no idea. Because I remember growing up, the Bible's in English. You're growing up in the West. Unless you're worldly, you don't really understand Greek and Hebrew. It's like that far off, distant thing.
Right.
But when especially for me, as I've gone and visited some of these ancient Christian sites in Turkey and, really seen some of those first century Christian sites,
right,
it makes you start to think, wow, this was taking place in the ancient world, in the Middle East, in Semitic languages that are foreign to me. And
Right.
even when you just hearing the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, or hearing hymns, Aramaic hymns is one of my favorite things to meditate to, or just while I'm driving, sometimes if my brain's stimulated, I'll play that. It's beautiful.
Right.
Such a stunning language. And then when you look at Aramaic, to your credit, some words have 7 or 8 possible different meanings. It's a completely different language than English. English is they might have 4 or 5 plus different, meanings or methods of being used.
Right.
But Aramaic it's a different language. It's like a poetic,
Very
universal, spiritual, metaphysical language.
Tons of wordplay. They were very punny. I think, there's some of that even existent in the Hebrew, which Hebrew and Aramaic are sister languages in a way, or they have a connection to each other.
So does it kind of go, maybe I'm give me the elementary school breakdown. It goes, Jesus spoke in Aramaic.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible itself was written in Hebrew as well as Greek.
Right. So,
so Greek came after Hebrew? Or are these all kind of
there's
simultaneously existing?
There's a lot of debate about origins of languages and these kinds of things. But what I will say is Aramaic is one of the oldest languages on the planet. Aramaic goes back to Assyrian, which is ancient Babylonian, really, really, really far back Aramaic goes. And it's a Semitic language. Hebrew is debated. There's Paleo Hebrew, which we know is really old, but it looks a lot different than the modern Hebrew that we have. The modern form of the Hebrew that we have, our earliest records of it really are the scripture. And that's what's complicated about it, because it uses only consonants, no vowels, actually. So there's all kinds of things you have to figure out, because now what we have in modern Hebrew, which was developed around the time that the Masoretic text was developed, which is our modern Hebrew from the Hebrew Bible, that was in the 13 to 1500s that this was actually developed, and they started adding little glyphs and notes on the consonants to point to which vowels are supposed to be there. But the oldest Hebrew doesn't have any vowels, so you kind of have to guess with context what the word even is or how it's actually spelled. Famously, Yahweh, right? We always hear about the name of God, Yahweh, but it's spelled only with consonants. So the A and the E in that word Yahweh is kind of a educated guess on what those vowels actually are.
Correct. I'm seeing some of the earliest discovered scrolls are coming from 600 BCE, so 7th century BC, and you're correct. Portions of the priestly blessing from Numbers chapter 6, 24 through 26, it says, "May Yahweh bless you and keep you," but it's spelled YHWH.
Yeah. So
that's kind of proof of there is room for, vowels being added, and as languages develop, you're trying to do your best to keep that original chain. But there are things that can be altered. Maybe something meant something different, and then this historian. That's one thing I think that's been fascinating. Is the more I've discovered biblical history or questioned biblical history, you come to see, hey, a lot of these texts were written quite after Jesus' death. I didn't know that about the Bible.
Yeah.
I didn't. I thought okay, Jesus died on the cross. Somebody went into a cave. He hopped on a little typewriter and just
whipped it out.
Here's the gospel. Publish.
Totally.
It wasn't that way. There was quite an epic battle in that first century that a lot could have been lost in translation. And, maybe there were other books. You see, I love, obviously the discovery of Nag Hammadi and, the Gnostic Gospels. We also see there was a lot of forgeries and a lot of manipulation. And so it's like, how do you know what is true and what is not? Somebody like Wes Huff does a great job of helping us discern. There are absolutely forgeries. And then there are some that are a little bit more up for question. So I guess, are there texts that you see that maybe have been thrown out or maybe disregarded? I know, one thing you've shared is there was a Hebrew gospel, and what we don't have it.
Right.
Correct?
Right. It
was the Gospel of Matthew?
Yes. So 12 of the church fathers, the who's who, Origen, Eusebius, the father of church history, Papias, Jerome, Epiphanius, all of them, they all attest to this Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, or the Gospel of the Hebrews. It's an interchangeable term. And Jerome, famously, who is the father of the Common Bible, Jerome was hired by Rome to create a Latin Vulgate, which was the first widely distributed Bible in Latin, because before that it was just in Greek, and Greek was kind of dying and not as many people were able to read it, and blah, blah, blah. Jerome takes on this task of translating the Bible into Latin, and he attests that while he's during that process, he comes across this Hebrew Gospel of Matthew that the Nazarenes use, which is actually the earliest name for the Christians in Syria. And he specifically says that it was written by hand by Matthew, and it was Aramaic, actually, but written in Hebrew letters. So Aramaic phonetics and pronunciation and word structure, but written with Hebrew letters. Some debate that maybe it was just Aramaic and Hebrew letters means, because Aramaic is kind of considered, back in those days, Aramaic and Hebrew, they would just call it all Hebrew. So anyways, he's attesting to this early gospel, and he even goes so far to say as it is believed to be the authentic Matthew. So...
And when would this have been? So this, what you're saying, is the earliest gospel, the Hebrew version, or...
To be fair, I'll say it's debated.
Okay.
But scholars who, are really diving into this subject, such as James R. Edwards is a big one. He's written an extensive work on the Hebrew Matthew, are fully under the impression that this is the earliest source that we have of a gospel. There's been this conversation for many years in biblical scholarship around what they call, it's kind of like the documentary hypothesis of the Old Testament. It's a source theory for how the Gospels were created. And, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are the four Gospels, right? But most scholars land on the idea that Mark is our earliest Greek gospel. It's the first. It's the most simple. It doesn't have a birth narrative. The actual original text doesn't even have a resurrection narrative. There's this famous long ending of Mark. Even Wes Huff type apologists will admit that it was tacked on to the end. But the original Mark ends with Mary at the grave weeping and telling no one, because she goes and the stone is, the grave's empty, but she just cries and she tells no one. That's the end of the story. And that is believed to be our oldest gospel. And then Matthew comes after, and Luke. Some people say Luke first, some people say Matthew first. There's different camps, but they built on the stories of Mark. And then John being the last one, the final one. Now, what's interesting about that is when you think about this Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, Mark, all of our gospel tradition, some of the earliest fragments that we have, most scholars date them, in like going into the 2nd century. So really late, like you said, decades to even centuries after the death of Jesus.
70, 100 years after.
Right.
Which is quite a long time.
Right. But Papias is...
Which doesn't mean that they're not accurate. It's just...
Right.
There's quite a bit of time
it raises
from that
questions.
event passing.
It raises questions. And Papias is the church father who's recorded first, the earliest, as knowing about this oracles of the Lord written by written by Matthew about Jesus. And oracles mean sayings, right? So everybody's always thought it's a sayings gospel. It's not as much narrative, like the story of he went here and he did that. It's like just what he said, like a recording of that. And what a lot of scholars say in this these hypotheses of how the Gospels were created is when they started to put together, and the synoptic Gospels are the first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The reason why they're called synoptic is because synoptic means beside, to look at beside. You can put them beside each other and see how they favor and borrow from each other. They use each other as sources, right? But there's this phenomenon that there are certain sayings within the Gospels that don't seem like they pulled from each other. They seem like they came from somewhere else. And so that they develop what's called the Q source theory, which means Quelle, which is like, I think, German for sayings, a sayings gospel. So they said, we don't know where it is, but using critical method, there has to be another source that we don't have that's older before these Gospels of some sayings of Jesus that made their way into all of them, but didn't come from them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they call it the Q source. Now, James R. Edwards is a scholar who's done an extensive work on why he believes the Q source is probably pulling from this Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, because he studies the Semitisms in Luke. So the Gospel of Luke has all these Semitisms where the Greek is written in such a way that it sounds like how a Hebrew talks, not how a Greek talks.
Wow.
And that points to it being pulled from this Semitic source. So,
well, let's look at this real quick. So most modern scholars date the Greek Gospel of Matthew to around 80 to 90 AD after Mark's Gospel. The Hebrew or Aramaic version that Papias refers to would therefore have been earlier, likely between 40 to 70 AD.
Right.
So possibly the earliest written gospel or source collection of Jesus' teachings.
Exactly.
So from your perspective, everything you've studied, why did it take that long to write this? This is where I'm a little bit more elementary understanding of that time period. Why would it have taken that long to write this? And so some scholars identify it with the so-called Gospel of the Nazarenes or the Gospel of the Hebrews, like you were saying.
Right.
So why would it have taken that long, do you think?
Well, you're getting into the
pure speculation.
Yeah, you're getting into the black box of the first century. There's so many questions.
I mean, there's a lot going on, right? I mean, the temple got destroyed.
That's a big piece of it. So when the temple
that's like all the records, correct? I mean, that's where a lot of things are kept.
Well, the temple of Jerusalem.
Well, and that temple is also heavily monitored by kept by the Pharisees who controlled it at the time.
Right. And James the Just, the appointed leader of Jesus after Jesus' crucifixion, he led the early church right after that, and he was in and around the temple, but also was a movement against the temple and the orthodoxy of the time, just like Jesus was. And when the temple is destroyed, the followers of James, the original church, the Nazarenes, they fled into the Transjordan, into the desert, into the caves. And so now we have the advent of these things like the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found, which are BC documents. A lot of these people had to hide this stuff. So it may have even been that there earlier, like the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, who knows, he could have been penning that at the same time as the mission of Jesus. But the persecution of these things was so heavy that, we don't really know exactly how the transmissions go, and we have a lot of speculation. And like even that where you just read that the Gospel of Matthew, the Greek, would have been 70, 90 AD, that's a speculation. I mean, it's based on some type of evidence, but we don't have a manuscript of Matthew from 70 to 90 AD. We don't have it. We have them going into like the second or even turn of the 3rd century, but we speculate based on the material of the gospel that it could have been written at that time. But to your point, the destruction of the temple was huge, as you know, with your work on Death of Recess, not only with Christian literature, but all literature is faced by the burning of Alexandria. Devastating. Probably one of the most devastating things to happen to humanity and civilization, full stop, period, ever, was the burning of Alexandria, our greatest library with all the keys. And we can draw the lines of how the movement of Jesus that he grew up in, the Nazarenes and the sectarian wilderness observing Hebrews, can be traced all the way back to some of the traditions of the Therapeutai, which are at Alexandria. They were Jews at Alexandria who were learning and syncretizing with some of the other Platonic thought and everything, all the way like Pythagorean era. Mm-hmm. And there was this beautiful Renaissance and
Pythagoras was one of the original vegetarians, correct?
Exactly. So Pythagoras, a squared plus b squared equals c squared is how you square.
That's where it came from?
Come on, man. Yeah.
Actually, that's probably one of the things I remember most from school. A squared plus b squared equals c squared.
Pythagorean theorem. But what they don't tell you about Pythagoras.
Didn't know how it affected my life, but maybe I'll figure that out right now.
Yeah, well, it's a big part of how we have corners and ceilings over us right now, because you got to square up walls and everything, and they all use the Pythagorean theorem.
Okay.
But Pythagoras, what most don't talk about in school, is that he had a massive education system of others that he was teaching as mathematics, right? And all of his findings. He's that guy is the attribution of things that we use today to him is astounding. So we just mentioned building, sacred geometry in general, mathematics, music. He created one of the first abilities to create scales and certain notes and aligning them with certain frequencies that there could be a standardized tuning. I mean, he was a savant, okay? But here's the interesting thing. In order to learn with Pythagoras or any of his pupils who were also teaching his systems, you had to completely reject the animal sacrificial flesh consumption system of the empire of the time. He would not train you if you were participating in the animal sacrifice. He was a staunch anti-sacrificial guy. And because of that stance, he was heavily persecuted, big time. No one really knows what happened to him. The records are scant. Records about Pythagoras are scant in general, but it seems to be that
that's confirmed, by the way. I'm just fact-checking that. Yes, Pythagoras would not have taught someone who ate meat because his philosophy included a strict vegetarian diet.
Exactly. And he was really anti-sacrifice in particular, because what we have to understand, too, one foundational piece for this whole conversation is we'll jump back and forth between the concept of animal sacrifice and the concept of consuming flesh. But we see those as separate in our day because we're so divorced from the sacrificial system now. We don't see it everywhere like they used to. What we have to realize, and what we uncovered in Christspiracy, is that the ancient animal sacrificial, more religious system was the early slaughterhouse system. They were one and the same. So the only way that people in the Greco-Roman Empire, or even in the kind of Hebraic Levant area, the only way they would actually eat animals was if it was sacrificed, because that was just the way it was prepared. That was a system that they built to create more meat for the masses. Otherwise, most people were so poor, they couldn't afford it. They were just growing grain and picking olives and this and that. So the animal sacrificial system, we'll talk about Jesus and some quotes where he's rejecting sacrifice, and here we see this is framing it as Pythagoras rejecting consuming flesh or consuming meat, but he was staunchly anti-sacrifice. But that was because it was one and the same. It was the same system. To reject one was to to reject both, basically.
Wow. So he was really trying to challenge the existing power structures in the world.
In all ways, because Rome and its imperial cult and all of the schools of Dionysus and Osiris that's Egyptian, but Egypt too. All of the world's big dominant religious systems, animal sacrifice and the temple sacrificial system was at the core of the religion. And it was essentially how we built, again, like the slaughterhouse. Temples were the first slaughterhouses. And that's what we uncover in Christspiracy, where in the film I actually went to the Temple of Jerusalem and went underneath into the gutters to find how the blood drainage systems worked. And that
was one of the most shocking parts of me in the film, without giving it away. I mean, please, again, watch Christspiracy and come back to this conversation if you haven't. But seeing those canals under the temple, seeing how much blood, I mean, you had to have literally drainage for the amount of blood that was coming from the Temple Mount. I mean, it's really hard to fathom that. And now the temple's destroyed. There's no sacrifices going on. I know they're
trying to crank it back up.
They are. It's a very hot topic right now. A lot of people are waking up to kind of this. There are people that want to bring back sacrificial, practices, and they actively are. Before we go that route, one thing I'm curious. So we're making this tie to Pythagoras, but let's try to bring it back to our original conversation. Mm-hmm. How the therapeutics kind of emerging from that in Alexandria, and we were talking about the burning of the records and the destruction of. We see the destruction of the temple, and we see all this happening. So how were these movements, do you think, intertwined or interconnected with what was going on in Alexandria, and then this kind of Nazarene Christian movement that was happening in Jerusalem as well? Were they connected at all, or
absolutely
pulling from each other?
Yeah. So first, let's go with the scripture, because I know many of the listeners that are Christian are going to be like, whoa, that sounds crazy. Like what? But we can even point to scripture and kind of get some clues. And one is, let's go back to Daniel. So Daniel, like you said, was somewhere between 500 to 600 BC. This is all around the same time as prophets like Ezekiel as well. And it's also the same time as Pythagoras. So Pythagoras was right there around that 500 to 600 BC eras when he was active and doing his school and everything. Remember, I mentioned that Daniel is a slave in Babylon, right? Guess who else was a slave in Babylon? Pythagoras. So Pythagoras famously was taken from, I believe, Alexandria into Babylon as well. And you can Google this right now. Google or chat or whatever, Nazareth the Assyrian, Nazaratus, Nazareth the Assyrian. Okay, what does it say?
An ancient teacher believed by some to be a master of the Greek philosopher Pythagoras.
Right, and does it go on to say, and also his
he is also identified by some ancient sources with the biblical prophet Ezekiel.
Exactly, Ezekiel. So
the connection to Pythagoras comes from figures like Alexander, who wrote about Pythagoras having this Assyrian teacher.
Right. So Pythagoras is a Platonic kind of schooled teacher, in that same realm of this awakening of Greek thought and Greek philosophy, which was stepping away from these sacrificial systems, heavy philosophy-based, morality-based, etc. But during the time of his exile, it seems to be from the sources that it's highly likely that he was intertwining with these Hebrew prophets like Ezekiel. And look at Ezekiel's name, Nazaratus the Assyrian, Nazarene. So there's some interesting ties there with this kind of lineage that goes from Jesus the Nazarene all the way back to the times of the exile, intertwined with Pythagoras. And so that's a scriptural reference of Ezekiel and then this historian writing about Pythagoras. But we have a Jewish historian named Philo who he lived in Alexandria, and he wrote extensively about the Therapeutai and the Pythagoreans and the Essenes, and how these are all coming from the same school of this intermingling knowledge that's emerging from the Alexandrian school. And then Josephus claims that the Essenes in the wilderness, and by the way, just so everybody's clear, there were multiple different sects of Judaism at the time of Jesus, just like there's a lot of sects of Christianity now. We've got Catholics, we've got Protestants, we've got Orthodox, and then
Baptists,
we've got the subsects of all of, there's so many different types of Christianity,
non-denominational.
Right?
Yep.
Well, at the time of Jesus, it's traditionally known that there were the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and this third sect, loosely called the Essenes. Scholars go back and forth with how strongly we can use that designation, because more than likely it's kind of a third philosophy that has its own designation into a few different groups, like the Nazarenes are one, the Essenes are one, but they're these communities that are out in the wilderness, and they're specifically rejecting the temple system in Jerusalem, and they're going out. They're kind of like hippies in a way, they're but really refined hippies, really, really smart. They want
not like tripping balls on mushrooms.
Yeah.
They're very pure.
Yeah, and less kumbaya fireplace, a lot more, like dialing in their spiritual practices and
living
everything.
on the land. They had a lot of ritual purity laws with water, baptism,
etc.
There's a lot of linkage to John the Baptist as well.
Yeah, and John the Baptist, people don't realize, this famous forerunner of Jesus, he's in the wilderness preaching the baptism for repentance of sins. And what that is it's a replacement for the animal sacrificial system in the temple, because they went to the temple to cleanse their sins and to repent and to do all of those things. But John the Baptist was in the wilderness and saying, hey, I got a ritual for you out here. Just come cleanse yourself, repent, and get right with God. And so in its own way, that's why a lot of people, scholars, are pretty, on the side of the consensus that John the Baptist was an Essene, or at least coming out of that group, therefore leading to the potentiality that Jesus has a connection with these same groups as well.
Wow.
So, but what I was going to say is Josephus documents that the Pythagoreans and the Essenes are coming from the same school and the same lineage. And how is that possible? It's because these groups were being persecuted by the greater empires. And then when they're in exile together, they're learning from each other and
sharing
knowledge. So
in the ancient world, I mean, it's all interconnected. Like when
Yeah.
I went into Gaza, I flew into Cairo and made the journey, across. Obviously, I had a car, a little bit better than a camel.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were traversing these routes,
Right.
absolutely sharing knowledge, sharing wisdom. So we were talking about John the Baptist, and something, you just came into town for my daughter's baptism.
Right.
You're the godfather. Shout out. And
you made enough I couldn't refuse.
you couldn't refuse. So I love, Jesus chose to be baptized, because I always looked at that. I'm like, why would Jesus choose to be baptized? I mean, he's the Messiah. Like
Right.
he doesn't have sin. So why? So when I was looking at that, I thought that was very fascinating. He chose that as basically this ritual purity,
Mm-hmm.
and he chose to be baptized by John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was his conscious choice.
Yeah.
Which I find fascinating. I mean, when you're talking about John the Baptist, likely it looks like coming from an Essene background.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is choosing. Why would you think he would choose that ritual and that purification, right, when he didn't need to?
Right. So great question. So when you understand the history of these groups, like I said, you've got the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are the temple Judaism system, and they're at that time of Jesus very in cahoots with the Roman Empire. They're actually, the Sadducees are appointed by Rome, to be almost like religious political figures in town and kind of running the province there, and then they kick a little tax money back up to Rome and all of this. So these groups that are loosely called the Essenes were not about that system. They thought that system was the beast system, essentially, that it was not of God. And so they went out to the wilderness to try to purify their religion or restore their religion back to the original way. And in fact, the followers of the way is another one of the earliest attestations or names for the earliest Christians, the way in the wilderness, before they got to the land and started getting involved in all this animal sacrifice. So to your point, Epiphanius, the church father of the 4th century, who has this book called the Panoraion, which is one of the most extensive works against heresies. And he wrote a book so that he could give to the bishops under Constantine to give them arguments against any sectarians that came with different beliefs than what the Orthodox Church was trying to establish. And he talks about there are 5 different sects of Judaism that he knows of, that he outlines in his section on Judaism. They are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, as in King Herod. King Herod's the one who built the temple. The Essenes, which is very similar to Essenes, but has a little bit of a different connotation. It means something like the doers. And the Hemerobaptists, which is kind of like perpetual Baptists. They baptize frequently. And the Nazarenes. So he actually names the Nazareans as a sect alongside the other Jewish sects.
And who is this again?
Epiphanius.
Okay.
Epiphanius of Salamis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And why this is such a bombshell fact is because we all know Jesus of Nazareth, right? Just as much as we have heard Jesus Christ, we know Jesus of Nazareth, another really popular designation of this most famous person in history. But what we explore in Christspiracy, without getting too deep into the weeds, is that there's this kind of misnomer that's been perpetuated around Jesus of Nazareth, that it's actually in the Greek, in our actual Greek Gospels, most often Jesus the Nazarene or Nazarene in almost every instance, but that's translated into English as of Nazareth, when in the Greek, it doesn't designate someone from a place. It's a sectarian title. And you could even Wikipedia this. Like if you type in on Google, just type in Nazarene title, just so that we get the title. And if you read...
it says a Nazarene is a title applied to Jesus that signifies he grew up in the town of Nazareth. That's what
And then keep reading.
The term also became a designation for his followers, often used by him, by both his supporters and his enemies. It can also refer to a specific early Jewish Christian sect or the modern Church of the Nazarene.
Oh, okay. Well, I was... Sorry, you chat GPT'd it. I was thinking you were reading the Wikipedia
page. The
page.
Wikipedia
Yeah,
one. My bad. Nazarene is a title used to describe the people from the city of Nazareth in the New Testament. There's no mention of either Nazareth or Nazarene in the Old Testament, and it is a title applied to Jesus, who, according to the New Testament, grew up in Nazareth, a town in Galilee located in ancient Judea. The word is used to translate 2 related terms that appear in the Greek New Testament, Nazarenos and Nazarios.
Mm-hmm. And keep the next.
Yeah, the phrases traditionally rendered as Jesus of Nazareth can also be translated as Jesus the Nazarene or Jesus the Nazarene. And the title Nazarene may have a religious significance instead of denoting a place of origin. Both Nazarene and Nazarene are irregular in Greek, and the additional vowel in Nazarene complicates any derivation from Nazareth.
Exactly.
Wow.
So what that's saying is the Greek spelling is making it nearly impossible, if not fully impossible, that the word Nazarene means someone from Nazareth.
Correct.
So the Wikipedia starts out by saying the New Testament presents it as Jesus of Nazareth, and it's traditionally rendered this way. However, the Greek term is a sectarian religious title.
Wow.
And so when you...
growing up, I always heard Jesus of Nazareth.
Right.
Like that's what I thought, Jesus from Nazareth.
Right. And so we now have Epiphanius of Salamis, who wrote this Panarion against, this book against heresies. And just to be clear, too, anyone who's listening that's, of the Christian faith, a lot of times critics of what I present will say, well, you're cherry picking data from the scripture, but often, and we can talk about this,
I've got some challenging questions. This is one of them. People will often say, oh, you seem to be cherry picking some things, saying this is altered, but this isn't.
Right. So we'll get into that. But alongside that same point that we can address in a moment, they'll also say, well, so we're just supposed to believe Cam's revelation about all this stuff? Like, Cam, come on. Like, after 2,000 years of all this, you're the guy that cracked the code? And the thing is no, I'm not. I mean, it's literally right there on Wikipedia. There are scholars that have been discussing this for centuries. We just haven't heard about them. And even more telling is Epiphanius of Salamis, who I'm about to discuss his writing on the sect of the Nazarenes. This is a book that was only translated widely in English in the 90s. So we're talking really fresh data in terms of public digestibility to be able to even comb through this stuff and pull out the nuggets that are in there. So in the Panarion, like I said, Epiphanius lays out these different sects of the Nazarenes, of Jews at the time of Jesus, and one of them is the Nazarenes. It's huge. So, and he even says that this sect existed before Jesus. So a lot of people that will try to push back on our claims in the film about the Nazarenes, they'll say, well, they were just called Nazarenes because they follow Jesus of Nazareth. But Epiphanius says they existed before Jesus.
And this is Epiphanius, we're talking, he lived...
4th century.
4th century.
Yeah, 4th century.
So were there people before him that also had this revelation? Where did he get that from, do you think?
So Epiphanius was, number one, he was talking to some of them on the ground in Syria. He was stationed in Syria. So he had some direct knowledge. He talked to some of them. A lot of what he did, which, actually caused some problems in terms of his oration and his polemics against these people, is he was just pulling sources earlier than him. So like one example would be, there's another name associated with this group called the Ebionites, or the Ebionim, and that's a Hebrew word for the poor, as in like blessed are the poor, right? And scholars like the ones we interview in Christspiracy and more, Dr. James Tabor, Dr. Robert Eisenman, who were instrumental in helping the world get access to the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way. They're like top Dead Sea Scroll scholars. They pretty much present this idea that the earliest church after Jesus are the Nazarenes, led by James the Just, the brother of Jesus, appointed by Jesus himself to be the leader. And a secondary kind of title or designation for them are the Ebion, or the Ebionim, the poor. And this is related to this idea of like voluntary poverty and giving alms to the poor and all these kinds of things.
Very in alignment with Jesus' teachings as well.
Exactly.
Right? Blessed are the poor.
Right.
Right. The meek will inherit the earth.
Exactly. And it's all through Isaiah. Isaiah says, God will judge the poor as righteous, et cetera, et cetera. So this theme of the poor is all over the Dead Sea Scrolls. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's even a designation in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are the communities where these Essenes were. It's, if anyone isn't familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the 1940s, all of these ancient biblical manuscripts were found by the Dead Sea, which completely blew up biblical scholarship in every way. And there's still stuff that we're learning from them. But one of the things that we learned is that this community where these John the Baptist type Jews were living, they had all over their text this designation, the poor, or the congregation of the poor, as in that's like kind of the name of their community or their church. And we have evidence of this in Acts, our book of Acts after the Gospels, the Acts of the Apostles, when Paul is rallying to James and Peter to go preach the gospel to other Gentile nations. When they finally come to agreement, they say, well, hey, while you're out there, just be sure to send your alms back to the poor, the Ebion. And so many scholars point to this is an actual like designation, something they self-identified as. Now, here's the big question is, at a certain point, that self-identification is maybe more internal, but it becomes external because church fathers later who wanted to criticize these earlier Christians because there may be some things that didn't align with the emerging orthodoxy they were trying to standardize, they called them the poor as an insult.
Correct.
Like, oh, it's those poor people. Mm-hmm. They're poor in intellect, is what Epiphanius says. So I bring all that up to say, when you ask about his sources, Epiphanius famously, when he's talking about the Ebion or the Ebionites, he thinks that they were founded by some dude named Ebion. That's how he starts the chapter. And now I'm going to talk to you about this sect who originated from Ebion, this, snake of whatever, because he thinks they're not correct. When the reality is he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's using sources like Justin Martyr and earlier church fathers who are talking about these groups and calling them Ebion.
Well, he even goes he called their views satanic deviations. I mean,
Epiphanius is famously
when you're talking about like we're talking about questions, asking questions.
Yeah.
He's making statements.
Yeah, he's making statements.
He's saying they are demonic. This is demonic energy or satanic energy, or satanic deviations.
Yeah. And he famously, like biblical scholars all know, even Christian ones agree that he's a very, very, very harsh critic. Like his own personal bias is coming in all over the place, and you have to deviate from what's his personal bias versus what's not. And so he makes fun of people throughout the text.
And would he be considered like more of like an Orthodox perspective? Is it like, why is he taking such a harsh stance? Why would he think that this movement of the Ebionim or Ebionites or the Nazarenes, why would that be heretical or satanic?
Right. Well, we have to understand that Epiphanius is a church father commissioned under the reign of Constantine to help standardize the Christian faith and make sure that when anyone comes wandering off the street into the churches saying like, hey, I'm a Nazarene, or hey, what about Gnosticism or these other things, that he's providing a book for the clergy and the bishops and everyone to be able to refute arguments that come in, right? And put out the standardized version of the faith. But in doing so, what is beautiful about it all is he's preserved some of the earliest ideas and records of the Nazarenes and the Ebionites, which are attested to by him as the earliest Christians.
Right. He's trying to cook them he's trying to like show, hey, yeah, I'm gonna cook you guys. What you're doing is satanic.
He's cooking them while admitting admitting
they exist.
Yeah. So one thing that he does, like check this out. So one thing that he does is chapter 18 of the Panarion is on the Nazareans, it's the Jewish section. So he's condemning Jews too of all different sects and why they're wrong. And one of them are the Nazareans with an S sound. You hear that? Nazarean, right? Then in the Christian section, he has Nazareans with a Z. So right there, he's trying to obfuscate by kind of like creating two different sects that were more than likely the same sect. And the S sound is pointing towards a more Aramaic pronunciation, because the Aramaic sound is a soft S, more like a sigma, whereas once these groups start developing into the Greek world, they change the soft S to the hard Z, zeta, right? And another funny thing about all of that is, he says in the beginning of the Nazorian chapter, which are the Christians, he says, full stop, the Nazarenes were the first Christians. That's what they were called. And then for a little while they were called Jesseans until they were finally called Christians. So he says the Nazarenes are the first Christians, full stop. He admits it. But then he also says, but in the opening of the chapter, I don't know if they were first or after or at the same time, or like he admits, I don't know when their origin really was. But here's what they believe, and here's why they're wrong. So he's like condemning the earliest Christians. These are the apostles. These are the followers of Jesus, and we have all the reasons in cross-connected other attestations from church fathers to help us make more sense about what really was going on. But
so something I liken this to, because the death of recess, I'm focused on this structure of education being standardized. And you look at, there was this push to make a factory model of education, and it has some benefits towards, like, look at our society, right? We have all of this, we have all this infrastructure, the industrialization of the world. We have cars and planes. We can go travel. Like, there's beauty.
Yeah.
And we're also polluting things where we've created forever chemicals. We've standardized the farming system. Like, there's that shadow side that we don't want to talk about. But now we are. Now people are waking up to that and questioning that because of these technologies and social media and like the access to information.
Right.
There's a lot of confusion in that.
Yeah.
But there's also that beauty in seeing that. So I see what you're sharing. It's like there was this standardization of religion.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to go as far to say that's a bad thing.
No.
It's a beautiful thing. However, there's a shadow to it.
Right.
And I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at this shadow, what was possibly, lost in.
Well, I have a great analogy.
In that standardization.
I have a great analogy for this because I'm in the same boat. I don't want anyone listening thinking that I'm trying to dog on the church itself, because I'm not trying to. Epiphanius maybe seems to be dogging on the early church, but I'm not trying to dog on anybody. And in fact, there's a great analogy for this that I learned from my boy, Dr. Nakarlongo Connor of Old World, Florida, who I was just visiting the other day while I was here with you. And he's a big orange juice fan because he's down here in Florida. And I am too. You know how I am about the orange juice, bro.
Yeah.
Orange juice is like God's gift to humanity.
Yeah.
And he made such a great analogy about what the greater church is and why it isn't something to be, condemned. It's just, think about orange juice and how pure and good it is straight off the tree. Oh my gosh. Like, everybody should have some of that good.
Yeah.
Right?
That's God's gleek.
Unfortunately, it's challenging to get fresh right off the tree orange juice into everybody's mouth around the world. So over time, processes are developed until finally you've got pasteurized, and then you've got concentrated, and then you've got reconstituted, and then you got that orange juice that you get out of the hotel room.
Oh, it's like powder,
and you drink it. But here's the deal: is that
sugar.
bad, or is it that someone around the world who otherwise would have never even thought or known there was anything called orange juice, someone around the world gets to have that taste of that reconstituted pasteurized orange juice, and they go, oh, dang, I wonder where this comes from. And then one day they follow the orange juice path down here to South Florida, and they pick one of them bad boys off the tree, and they go, bing!
Yeah.
The pasteurized orange juice is important. So the analogy is the church over time kind of had to standardize and pasteurize itself to be able to spread into the greater world, or it never would have.
Correct.
It needed to acquiesce certain edges to be able to assimilate into a world that would have otherwise completely rejected its purest form. But now we're in a age where we've got access to information, technology, communication around the world, and it's the perfect timing where now people are going, I've had that pasteurized stuff, but what's that fresh squeezed stuff?
Let me open this treasure chest. Let's look inside. Yeah, that's so true. And now we have all these tools to really ask deeper questions here.
Yeah.
So someone like, Aaron was also on that podcast. And with Wes, you guys didn't really get into it in depth, but and I know you all might have different views on this. Some of these biblical, or these historical figures like Constantine and Paul, very when you look at them from a pure storytelling standpoint, very fascinating characters because they have these two shadow sides. You look at Constantine, being an emperor, having massive statues built, and then having a coming to Christ. And it's like, how do you look at that? That's interesting. With someone who is so influential in standardizing religion, it's like, he was persecuting Christians, correct, for a while, or?
Well, Paul definitely was.
Paul was.
Constantine, I think, has some history of that, more so the emperors before him, but he was the one that did have the epiphany and said, hey, I want to allow, take off this taboo around this religion, make it more of the empirical religion. But he did have some issues. I mean, he killed his family, and his mother Helena was kind of.
They got some complex history in there.
Yeah, it's
a little sticky.
A little bit of reality TV crazy vibes going on.
Yeah. So when I don't say that to say what they've done is incorrect, but to your point, you have to question: is that the source?
Right.
Right. Is that the pasteurized orange juice?
Yeah. Is it the vehicle that's getting some of the truth out?
Yeah, and is it like it had to happen, like you said?
Yeah.
Just like the industrialization of American education, it had to happen. It worked when it did. Now we have to evolve. Now we have to become more conscious and innovate.
Yeah.
It seems that way. That's kind of emerging with our faith. Is we have to really get down to the source, to really have that connection to the truth, and that only comes when you ask questions instead of, I think. If you want to just say, hey, the early church fathers were perfect, let's trust everything they say, that's not the source.
Yeah.
That's, a secondhand source. And I'm not saying, again.
Super important source. I've learned.
Yeah.
So for the record, I was raised Protestant. And Protestant is like the farthest arm out from the source. I'll straight up tell you.
Like, I was raised Protestant.
You know, if anyone, we don't
Lutheran.
have to get, we don't have to get into church history, but Protestantism is the last big movement of church history where a sect broke away and created all these other, feels like millions of other sects. And so you have this movement now where a lot of Protestants are going back to the source by either converting to Catholicism or Orthodoxy because they see that it's earlier and there's things about it that were maybe lost in the Protestant faith. And, you know, what I see is we're going to keep going back, and you're going to have someone like me who I was raised Protestant, and when you're raised Protestant, you don't know anything about church fathers. I never heard about Epiphanius. I didn't know who Jerome was, Origen, any of these guys. And so when I come to that with fresh eyes, that's a big part of the reason of why I've landed where I've landed is I just, with fresh eyes and no bias, I started reading this material and saying, wait a minute, this guy is saying that the first Christians were Nazarenes. And then he's saying the Jews before them, there was a sect of Nazarenes, but then he's saying they're different, but then he's saying he don't know he doesn't, and you start to put the pieces together, and I don't have the bias to be like, I have to hang on every word that he says in this particular way. I just start to look at it like, what's this guy pointing to in the 4th century, and what does he maybe not know? And you go back, and so that's how we get this information. And I truly see that we have this really, really early core movement that we talk about in Christspiracy, and that I talk about much deeper in these types of conversations, that now what I'm trying to present is not another Reformation or something, which is what Protestantism was. I'm trying to present the possibility of a restoration.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nothing. Wow. It's nothing new. It's just going back. Can we go back to the earliest attestation and the earliest example of what this really was? Wow. And we have fragments of what this was through these church fathers, through secular Christian history. You know, apologists will say, when pressed about the origins of Christianity, and people that will say, oh, come on, it was made up and it was this and it was that. One of the best sources is Pliny the Younger's letter to Trajan, when he's talking about the Christians who moved into what is now the area of kind of like modern day Turkey. And Pliny's this kind of general, this military leader over the area, and he's telling Trajan, the emperor of Rome, he says, hey man, these Christians are moving in, Christiani, which is the Latin. He's writing it in Latin. I'm paraphrasing, but he says the Christians are coming to town. And this is 111 AD. So this is why, you know, biblical scholars around the world will point to this as like, this is our earliest source of the Christians, you know, earlier than the Gospels, the fragments that we have. And what does Pliny say about them? He says, he doesn't really know much about them, but he says there's this group, the Christians, they're coming in, they're meeting in their houses, kind of in secret in their houses. They're offering prayers to Christ, and they're reciting oaths to each other, but not oaths to do something, rather oaths to not do things like stealing, lying, committing adultery, usury. So he's basically describing the 10 Commandments. They're meeting in secret, they're praying, and they're honoring the 10 Commandments towards each other. And then afterwards, they gather to partake of innocent and harmless food. Okay? Now, some Christians, just to be fair, some Christians will say Pliny is saying this because there was a rumor at the time that Christians were like meeting in secret and eating like babies and stuff because no one knew who they were, and they were scared of them, and they were trying to like slander them, right?
So that's where some of the satanic practices, I guess, that's why they would call it. Yeah. I mean, when I'm looking at all of these, the ways they're living, none of that sounds satanic.
Yeah. No.
So it's kind of confusing. Why would these guys make that leap?
Right.
Like if I see somebody, I mean, and I resonate as somebody who like went vegetarian, and you have all sorts of people making fun of you, mocking you, thinking it's a joke, calling you names, and you're just like, I'm just trying not, all I'm doing is just not eating animals. Why is that so triggering? Yeah,
and most of the time, none of it's based on any kind of evidence. They're just ad hominem attacks.
It's like a trigger. They're just triggered.
Yeah, so But back to Pliny, what I was saying is they're meeting and they're eating innocent, harmless food, which actually points to potentially non-sacrificial food, not no animal sacrificed food. And then here's where we get the context that makes it seem like that's what he's talking about, because just following that, and you can read it if you want, he says, so I'm persecuting these people. I'm finding people in the cities who know who they are and know where they are, and I'm forcing them to give them up to me. Once I have them, I give them 3 chances to renounce their faith, and upon the 3rd chance, if they do not, I kill them. Since employing these methods, miraculously now, all of the cities whose temples were once desolate and meat markets which have long been empty are becoming frequented again. Basically, he's saying,
wow,
when these Christiani moved in and started meeting and eating innocent, harmless food and honoring the 10 Commandments, people quit going to the sacrificial temples, and they're not, and the meat market, he calls it the shambles. The meat market is shut down. No one's partaking. But I started killing them, and now business is booming again. That's Pliny's letter to Trajan, okay? Trajan then responds, and Trajan says, good job, Pliny. I approve. Again, I'm paraphrasing in modern language. I approve. And I think he says something like, I wouldn't give them 3 chances, I'd give them 1. But here's the most important part. When they renounce their faith, make sure they perform the rites in your presence. What does that mean? Scholars, point to Trajan's telling Pliny, make sure they sacrifice an animal in front of you to prove their allegiance to Rome. And if they don't, this is a good litmus test to know if they're actually one of these quote-unquote Christiani, right? So we have all of this evidence from secular sources like Pliny the Elder, or I'm sorry, that's Pliny the Younger. We have Epiphanius in the 4th century who's saying there's these Nazarenes, and that, that's the point that I was going to say, is the Nazarenes in the Jewish section. It's chapter 18 of the Panoraion. Anyone, again, don't take my word for it.
Check it out.
Check it out. Look it up yourself. It's the Panoraion, chapter 18. And he says of the Nazarenes that they're just like all the other Hebrews in every way. They observe the Sabbath. They believe they're descendants of Israel, but they live in the Transjordan, he says, which is the area east of the Jordan, in the desert, in the wilderness, where John the Baptist was baptizing. And he says the only difference from them and the other Hebrews, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, is that they will not offer sacrifices or eat flesh because they believe it's unlawful to do so. Okay? So when you take that evidence, which is a Christian-sourced church father, Epiphanius, but then you pair it with evidence where he's saying that the Nazarenes were called Nazarenes first, and then they became called Christians. And then you hear what I just told you, that Pliny the Younger is saying the first Christians were also observing this same type of behavior. And then you learn that Pliny the Elder, Pliny the Younger's uncle, who is one of the most famous historians of the era, in 50 AD writes natural history. And in his natural history, I believe it's chapter 19, he's talking about Syria, and he's just laying out everything he knows about Syria and the Transjordan. And he says below this river Amapa, which is the south of Syria into the Transjordan, lies the Tetrarchy of the Nazarini. That's the Latin transliteration of Nazarenes. The kingdom, Tetrarchy is kingdom, Tetrarchy of the Nazarini, okay? In the same area that Epiphanius says that these Nazarenes lived, that existed even before Christ, that rejected animal sacrifice and flesh consumption, which is the same area that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, which is the same area that John the Baptist was baptizing Jesus. Whoa. To circle back to your point.
Holy cow.
Pliny the Elder's attestation of the Tetrarchy of the Nazarini is as old as it gets. He writes in 50 AD, but he's using census records from 30 to 50 BC. So these Nazarenes go all the way back to potentially 50 BC, way before Jesus. So Jesus is rising out of a movement that has this predisposition that carries through. We have attestation that his brother James the Just, from Eusebius, the father of church history, claims, and so does Epiphanius, by the way, and so does Hegesippus, that James the Just, the brother of Jesus, abstained from animal flesh from his mother's womb.
Wow, really?
Mary, meaning he didn't partake in animal flesh from his birth. So meaning Mary had him abstain from animal flesh.
I know there's some people that would say James is like a half-brother.
Yeah, you can, depending on your theological bent, it's either the half-brother.
So he could have been Joseph's son, potentially?
He could have been Joseph's son, but I think what most people mean when they say...
But he's still coming from a mother that would have abstained from that.
Well, many would say that are adhering to the doctrine of the virgin birth, he would be the half-brother because he was born out of... He's the younger brother. So Jesus was born out of Mary's virginity, but James is born out of Mary and Joseph. So he's the half-brother in that he's not also a virgin, born of God sort of thing. So
correct.
There's
Well, let's dive into, when it comes to, like, I was just going to look up, I remember in the book of James, he talks about, I believe it's James, where he talks about faith without works is, how does he say, is dead, right?
Yeah.
And, I guess that's where this lineage becomes really important, because you hear, this is where theology comes into play, theology versus like actions, like living, a lot of orthodoxy, from what I'm gathering, I don't ever want to generalize. I know there's so much nuance here, but from what I gather, it's this idea that there's no amount of works that can save you. It's faith alone, or obviously there's so many different variations of this. It's faith and works are the fruit of that faith. Which is something I really resonate with. And so I guess that's what I'm curious about from your perspective. When we look at, living like Christ, what would Jesus do? Why do you think it's important to understand where Jesus is coming from? He's coming from this Nazarene movement, which is what you're saying here. And I think you've presented very good evidence that that's correct. So he's coming from this sect, this movement, and why is this important, to identify, I guess? I mean, from my perspective, I see it as, okay, the Messiah is coming, and he's showing us a way of life. Yeah. He's asking us to be transformed.
The way, that's literally what they were called in Acts, the way.
Yeah. Right. He's showing us a way, and that way does not include eating animals.
Right.
Obviously, many other things. It's not just that, correct?
Yeah.
We're taught not to cheat, not to lie, not to steal. I mean, to love God, love our neighbor, all these beautiful teachings. And, right? It's an and.
It's an and.
And to not eat animals.
Yeah.
That's a pretty significant thing. And, I'm the same as you. I loved chicken wings. I loved eating steaks. I loved it all. To give that up, I mean... Yeah. To say we have an agenda here is like for us to give all those pleasures up, those amazing yummy foods, those barbecues. Yeah, it's not like people often think like as vegetarians or vegans, you're trying to be annoying and convert everybody, which some people are. But man, I would love to be able to go to a barbecue and just eat what everybody else is eating. I think part of abstaining from those things is our attempt to be Christ-like. And I'm speaking for myself, but I'm curious to hear from your perspective. How do we navigate that with that orthodoxy view and kind of this view? Where do you stand on that?
Well, to give the actual Orthodox Church its flowers, I think it's the closest to the tradition that I'm discussing here. In that the Orthodox faith, my beloved Alishwa, she is Coptic Orthodox, and she's been a huge teacher in my life, becoming close to her, becoming close to her family, and then learning more about the Orthodox faith. It was like really good timing, because there's the Orthodox faith, and then Coptic is even on the front end of the earliness of that. Copts in Egypt and the Ethiopic Orthodox are what's called Oriental Orthodox, and it actually seems to potentially, some would argue, predate even Standard Orthodoxy. Like it's the early. It's like the Armenian Church. Armenian Church and the Coptic and Ethiopic Orthodox are all really, really early. And the earlier you go in these Orthodox traditions, the more animal meat, flesh-free fasting days you get. So a true like Coptic priest is supposed to fast. I think it's like 246 days a year,
Yeah,
which
it's
is
a lot.
basically the whole
When I was in
year.
Ethiopia, it was the same.
Yeah.
Everybody was fasting for, I think it was like 160 some days or something like
Yeah,
that.
and they're all naturally vegan, flesh-free fasts.
Yep.
And then
Lots
you've
of
got
fruit, lots of
you've got
vegetables,
the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, who on Christmas specifically abstained from all animal flesh on Jesus's birthday, which is interesting. Like, what's up with that? So there's all these remnants of the tradition in the Orthodox faith, and I do believe when it comes to the works conversation, like, what do we actually do about our faith? Cool, we can have all the intellectual knowledge, we can sit here and talk all day, but like, what kind of impact are you actually making on the world and on yourself and your own personal flaws and lifting your... And I think the Orthodox Church has some great doctrines on that too. They carry the doctrine of theosis, which is literally refining one towards that union with God, that same union with God that Christ did. So they don't put like this limit on, like, no, you're just... I think in some ways...
You're a sinner. And
exactly.
You're
The extremes of Protestantism that I grew up in, and mind you, my church was actually not as harsh on this, but there is that thing that everybody kind of feels like is the meme of Christianity, which is like, we're all kind of condemned to hell and we're sinners and, this and that. But I don't think the Orthodox message really nails it like that. It's much more of an inspiring, like, hey, we have the opportunity to become elevated in our pursuit of being like saints on earth, to become more saintly, to serve the poor, to do these things. And it is, I think, inextricably tied to our faith. We wouldn't do it if we didn't have faith that there was a reason to, right? But I think there's a problem in that as the church has gone along, it's divorced itself from the works more and more and more and more with like every denomination and every new iteration, to the fact where it's just something you say and believe in your head as like the right thing to say and believe in your head. And the problem with that is that actually becomes Gnosticism. Like, all of these Christians love casting, shade at Gnostics. I've been called a Gnostic before, which I'm not, by the way. I repudiate Gnosticism. Why? Because Gnosticism is the idea that you can just attain the right knowledge and that somehow will save you. And that somehow is the answer to the Gnostics. By the way, the Gnostics were a really early Christian group too, like really, really early. That's a whole other problem that a lot of Christian scholars have with trying to understand how Christianity developed, because a lot of it developed in opposition to the Gnostics. Like, they were just trying, like, Christianity grew and got stronger because it was trying to combat the Gnostics, because the Gnostics were really early. Like, Marcion is the main godfather Gnostic, basically. And he put together the first Bible in like 140 AD, before we ever had any Christian Bible, or like modern Orthodox Christian Bible. He had the first one. And so they had to combat him. But bottom line, most don't understand that when you go so down the rabbit hole or the way of like, it's works don't matter, it's only faith, that starts to become Gnosticism, because it's like, what I say and believe about this religion, what I say and believe about Jesus is what's the most important thing. That's just all mental. What do you do about that? How does that flow? And I think that's, to your point about why is it important to know about this lineage of Jesus in this, because it is the way.
I just got goosebumps.
It is.
Yeah.
What would Jesus do? What did he do? What did he live? Who really was he? And if we're meant to, as he says in our Greek Gospels, to go on and do even greater things than he, what things?
Yeah, that's a tall calling.
And what we see, the earlier we get, is, like you said, there are many different aspects and practices. The baptism, the prayer, serving the poor, the last shall be first, the first shall be last, the greatest in the kingdom is the least, right? Mm-hmm. These kinds of concepts of flipping of the social structure. But also, why I focus on this animal sacrifice piece is, number one, I think it's the most forgotten piece. So sometimes people will be like, dude, why are you so obsessed with this? It's not that I'm obsessed. It's like, I just think it's the least talked about part. It's the most forgotten part. There are plenty of churches that give alms to the poor and do things. There are plenty of churches that talk about the 10 Commandments. There are pretty churches. But man, this aspect of animal sacrifice and flesh consumption and how we treat God's creatures, who we share the planet with, who share the same breath of life, the scripture says, shares the same ruach, the spirit of God.
Yeah, the way we treat them is often overlooked.
And if we truly rest on the person of Jesus as the moral axiom of our lives. What is Jesus's moral axiom? When he's really pressed, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? He says it's simple. Love God and love others as you love yourself. Do unto them as you would have them do unto you. And my argument, and what I believe the Nazarenes' argument was that others extended beyond just the human species. That we have animal brothers and sisters that shared paradise with us in the ancient Hebraic faith, in the Garden of Eden. We named them. They were our friends. They were our personalities. And in that dominion, which now I want to circle back to because it was one of your first questions, that dominion in Genesis 1:26-28 is defined by we're not killing and eating them. That word dominion, when you go to the Hebrew, it's yeridu is the Hebrew word, translated as the English dominion. For centuries, millennia, we've assumed that the word yeridu comes from a Hebrew root word, radah, which means to press down, to subjugate, kind of like a tyrant or a king who's exuding tyranny over his people, okay? However, the word radah does not match as a Hebrew root word for yeridu. There's a problem with one of the letters. But what word does match is the word yarad. You can even hear it when I speak it in an English, phonetic language. It's yeridu, yarad, okay? Yarad, what it means is to lower oneself in service to. So when you ask yourself if Jesus, if Yeshua, the Christ, is the ultimate example of how we as humans are to be on earth as lights to the world and as God's perfect design, he's the servant leader. Everything about Jesus is the last shall be first, the first shall be last, do unto others. It's a service base. You go to any Christian church and they'll agree with that. They'll agree with, Jesus is the ultimate. He's the suffering servant. Isaiah 53, the prophecy about him is literally called the suffering servant, okay? So in dominion, in its original root, which I and other scholars have pointed to, it being yarad, it literally means to serve creation, to serve the other creatures. We're not over them to dominate them. We're actually here to help them thrive.
Wow.
Right? And Jesus really lays this out in the Gospels. In John, one of my favorite verses that Jesus shares is John 10, verse 10 and 11. We actually quote this in Christspiracy. It's the famous scripture of the Good Shepherd. But what a lot of people miss is he says in John 10:10, the thief, the enemy, the adversary, the devil, Satan, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come to bring life and life abundantly. That's verse 10. Verse 11, the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I am that good shepherd. Okay? Well, in that verse 10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That word kill, the Greek, which is what that text of John was written in, the Greek is thysia, which means animal slaughter. It's the word for slaying the animal in sacrifice in the temple. So when you put that in context and really understand what the actual Greek word is saying, let's shift that meaning to be a little bit more accurate. Jesus is saying, in Jerusalem, while the lambs are being led to slaughter in the temple with bloodshed everywhere, it's a full-on slaughterhouse. He says, the thief comes to steal, slay animals, and destroy, but I have come to bring life and life abundantly. The good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. I am that good shepherd. Now, of course, there's plenty of metaphor that he's also talking about people, not just sheep. Like you said, Aramaic was a poetic language. Mm-hmm. He's speaking in poetry, but he's meaning like the sheep of the people that are listening, that are following God, and God is the shepherd. But he also, I think, is pointing to the literal sheep being just demolished, probably a few 100 yards from where he's standing when he's saying this.
Yeah.
And
in that biblical account, he's freeing the animals. He's setting the animals free.
Exactly.
That I don't think
he goes
the Messiah would do that accidentally.
Yeah, he goes into the temple famously, and this is the big crux of Christspiracy, and so I don't want to give too much away. We go into so many more proofs.
Yeah, you got to watch the film for really
the context.
for the context.
But he goes, the famous, one of the most historically attested, agreed upon even by secular scholars, event that most likely actually happened in Jesus's life is the cleansing of the temple, when he goes in and disrupts the whole system. And we don't realize in church, I wasn't taught that Jesus comes in and his disruption, he's flipping the tables. That's what we hear on Easter Sunday and scattering the money and all that. Jesus is shown in the same Gospel of John that I just quoted as actually freeing the animals in the temple. He flips the tables and he does all that we've seen, but there's a real focus on the animals. It says that he literally frees the oxen and the sheep for sacrifice, and he lets the doves free that are in these cages and everything, and it's a direct full frontal attack on that system. And he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, right? So there's this confrontation of this bloodshed system. And why I bring all of that up is because when you frame that event with these statements like, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep, I feel this is Jesus exuding to the nth degree true dominion, lowering yourself in service. I will put my life down for others, not just of even my own species, but of the greater kingdom of God's creatures. I want to do everything I can to, less of me, more of what can I do to serve and make the world thrive. And so what would Jesus do? I think the question is, in terms of the context of this conversation and what Christspiracy is about, Jesus would not just abstain, and like Eusebius, the father of church history, says, he declares that all 12 apostles, in the proof of the gospel, his work on church history, he declares all the 12 apostles abstained from animal flesh. But I think it's beyond just not doing something. I think it's, what do you do? And I am so inspired by what you're doing in the world. That's why I'm always keeping up with you on Instagram when you're in Gaza or Ukraine and this and that, because it's powerful to affect supply and demand change by abstaining and protesting things that aren't good. But what are we actually doing to actually make a new system? And so in Jesus's, again, to use him as the moral archetype, he's calling that kingdom of heaven, which we're to participate in. And he says, you will do even greater things than me. So if my homeboy can go into the temple and throw down like that, dang, what am I supposed to do? And so that's where you'll see in the film, a lot of it is going into these conversations that can be kind of heavy about these systems and these mistranslations. And we're barely scratching the surface. I know so many people listening are going to have questions. Well, you didn't talk about this verse and you didn't talk about that. Trust me, I did on another podcast or somewhere. Go down the rabbit hole, research it for yourself. But the bigger point is, now it's 2025. We're here. What are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? And how can we be instrumental in manifesting that kingdom of heaven on earth? And even if you're not a person of faith, whatever that means to you, bringing more justice, bringing more peace for all, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, we're called to honor God's creation. And I think, like as above, so below. You look at how animal agriculture, factory farming in particular, the negative implications it has on our planet. I don't think that's just random.
Yeah.
I think we've forgotten how to listen to the symptoms and the signs. That's why we have a broken healthcare system. That's why we have a broken education system. This is why we have a broken food system, is because we've forgotten to respect and communicate properly with nature,
right,
with God's creation. We've forgotten how to respect it. And we've become so removed from that chain, right? Like education is why I'm focused on it. We used to be primarily homeschooled, apprenticeships, like that is kind of like the Commonwealth era of the United States. And now we've been so far removed from the home, and we're facing mass indoctrination in schools. You have all this confusing curriculum. That doesn't happen when education is within the family, when you're connected to your child, right? It's the same thing with our food system. You let it be factory, standardized and industrialized, and then there's all sorts of these pesticides and chemicals that are creating, spikes in autism potentially, and all of these horrible health implications. We get away from our health. We start, there's so many rabbit holes to go in, but you look at when you drift away from that natural order, there's these consequences and there's these pains, and really that's not punishment. It's just a call for us to wake up and for us to really question, why are we doing things this way? Why do we believe this?
Right.
And I think when you look at from that faith perspective and things you've brought up that are so illuminating, we're not called to be pacifists. We're not called to just say we're sinners. There's nothing we can do about it. I'm not condemning people for believing that. I understand that. I believed that. But we're actually being called to be transformed, right? Transformed by the renewal of our mind. And when we renew our mind, we renew our actions. Like we take different actions. Like Jesus is calling us to do this. And so what are those actions? Like you said, I think the most powerful action you can take, and from my perspective, at least this is just my perspective, is to really be mindful of what you're consuming.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the environmental burden of what we consume, the trash, everything we throw away, it's a constant call to really respect creation and be a steward.
Yeah.
And you look at just the amount of, if you go vegetarian even, you look at the amount of land and water you preserve and the amount of trees that you preserve. What got me into this line of work, working with GEM and the nonprofit I'm with, is in 2019 with the Amazon wildfires, I actually started to learn these fires are actually because of the cattle ranchers that are trying to destroy the Amazon to grow more soybeans for cattle land. Right. Those soybeans are widely used to feed the cattle.
80% of all soy on planet Earth is fed to cattle.
So you look
80%.
That's insane. So you look at, what if we actually just used a fraction of that to just feed us?
Right.
I'll take the title of soy boy all day. I don't care.
Well, bro, that's what I always tell people.
Soy is packed with protein, boy.
It is. And people always come at us. We joke about it with calling us soy boys for talking about this kind of thing. But I'm like, come on, bro. If you're eating cattle are fed 80% of all soy. Who is the soy boy here?
Who's the soyest of the boys?
Right. But yeah, we went down to the Chaco Forest in Christ-Spiracy, and we observed the soy fields that are being cleared for cattle and the fields where they're grazing and where they're living. It is detrimental, the number one culprit of deforestation around the planet. People have all their opinions about climate change, what's real, what's not. I can tell you what is real. I have my questions too about the whole climate change narrative, but I can tell you what is real. Deforestation. I've seen it.
Facts. Yeah.
And that at least creates a micro climate change.
Oh,
when
absolutely.
you've got trees in an area that are holding condensation and providing shade to the ground and all of this, I've been there. You can be in one area and in the trees, and then you can go to the area where they've cleared for the soybeans, and it's 100 yards away, and it's a 15-degree difference in temperature.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's insane.
And you look at modern cities and
yeah.
and what we're built on, and you really ask, for me, I'm asking, how could I be Christ-like in a modern society? And wow, it's such a profound question. I'm going to ask that every single day for the rest of my life. It's every single thing that I'm doing, I can, if I look at it from that lens, I can take action. I can take tangible action to try to make the world a better place through what I do, through what I consume.
Right. And exactly. That's why I think it's so beautiful in a way that Jesus did flip the tables in the temple, because it's kind of its own metaphor. I see this meme that people pass around online sometimes, and it's Jesus flipping the table, and he's like, it says, some of y'all are sitting at tables Jesus meant to flip, that you were supposed to flip, and I literally think about what we put on our table and what we sit in front of and what it represents and what we do consume. And, nobody's perfect. I'm not here trying to condemn anyone. I'm not trying to be judgmental about anything. Like we started this, it's just about asking the question, where did that come from? Food is some of the most intimate of all our actions that we do in ritualistic every single day. I mean, we some of us have 3 meals a day, right? It's a ritual, and it's just a different kind of ritual. So when you think about these ancient sacrificial systems and what came with it, not even just the Hebrew, like the Greek, the Roman, the Hindus, all these cultures have had these sacrificial blood killing systems. And we think now that's all done with, especially from a Christian lens, like it's over.
Yeah, the temple's gone.
But is eating a meal 3 times a day not a kind of ritual? If we're Christians, do we not pray over it? What is that altar of the table, and what's sitting on it?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And where did it come from? Or where did they come from?
Yeah,
You know,
and these are tough questions.
Remembering
for sure.
the who or the beings of these animals, and again, you know, just it's hard to really understand this scale, but most people may not know that 90 billion animals, land animals, are killed every year in our industrial food system. That's like annihilating the human population 10 times over every single year. That's the numbers, just to give some scale. And that's not even including fishes in the ocean. If you include fishes, we're getting into the trillions of, it's unfathomable, the amount of death and bloodshed and
a lot of death
suffering
on this planet. Well, I think that is probably what, you know, I hear it a lot. I mean, you know, if you look into nature is brutal. Like that paid nature is metal. It's like,
yeah, lions eating gazelles.
Yeah, they're pretty. Nature's pretty rough.
Right.
But do you see that as that's just it's because we're kind of living in this fallen state? We're trying to restore it. I mean,
that's a great question. If we pointed to the Bible, the interesting thing is in the Garden of Eden, we've mentioned multiple times Genesis 1:29, humans are giving vegetables and fruits for food, and then in 1:30, animals are given plants for food. So in the Genesis Edenic vision, there are no predator-prey relationships. It's all herbivores. And the Isaiah prophecy of the kingdom of heaven on earth, the future kingdom that Jesus is calling forth and everything, is a return to that. It says in Isaiah 11 that the wolf will lay with the lamb, the lion will eat straw like the ox, and they will not hurt or destroy on my holy mountain, meaning the humans too, because it starts talking about the human species, the child will lay with the serpent, and blah, blah, blah. It's showing this relationship that these threatening species aren't threatened anymore by each other.
I just had an interesting connection. I think when you talk about faith, oftentimes we look in the past. We say, yeah, we have faith of the virgin birth. We have faith that Jesus was the Messiah. Now, when you're talking about the prophecy for the future, faith has to be applied there.
Yeah.
You can't use logic to look back and explain the virgin birth. You also can't use logic to look forward and explain the restoration of the garden.
Right.
Like it could take, in our human minds, that could be thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. But when you have faith that if that's what's promised to us, and we're being called to help
usher that in, you will do even greater things than me, Jesus says. And guess what he also says in that same breath? He says, I think it's Mark 16:15. He says, go and preach the good news, the gospel, unto all creatures. The word is creatures in Greek. And some translations will translate it as creation, but it's most accurately creatures. So it's really interesting that that's Jesus's last call. And what I see with that Edenic restoration vision in Isaiah, the wolf will lay with the lamb, all of this, of course, many Christians, or especially maybe non-Christians, will be like, come on, are you saying that there's going to be no more predators? Like, that's not even scientific. Like, how could that even be possible? But I've thought deeply on this, and there are theories about morphogenetic resonance, where animal species take on completely new traits mysteriously because certain segments of that same population take on that trait. Like, look up the 100th monkey theory, these kinds of phenomenon. And there's evidence of crocodiles starting to eat only fruit out there. There's evidence of polar bears, which are extremely carnivorous. This made headlines not long ago. There are polar bears that are now becoming omnivorous, and they're growing some brown hairs now because they're a recent genetic offshoot from grizzly bears. And they were only carnivores because of circumstance, because that's all they could get in the ice. But now there's more availability, and so there's all these phenomenon of actually some shifts in carnivorism towards at least a more omnivorous diet. But here's the big kicker: as I was meditating on it, and I was like, is it possible? Is it possible somehow? Is there a responsibility we have as humans to maybe guide the animal kingdom the same way we guide our children to make the right decisions? And I'm thinking about this, and as funny as it is, I'm sitting there, and I look over to my right, and my dog is Scout, that you know well, is looking at me, and he's hungry. And he's actually a totally plant-based dog, by the way, and he's thriving.
He's very healthy.
He's 10 years old. He's as young as they can be. The Guinness World Record, longest living dog for many years, didn't eat meat. So I've been testing it, and he's just thriving. He's like a puppy dog at 10 years old. But he's looking at me, and he's hungry, and I have this epiphany. The Isaiah prophecy says, the wolf shall lay with the lamb. And I'm looking at Scout, and I'm like, dude, you're a wolf, bro. And you're about to go just ham on some sweet potatoes right now.
Yeah.
And if I put you in a pen with a lamb, you would not eat the lamb. You would just lick it. So is that some evidence of that relationship with the human that's now created a species which has moved from a predominantly, I mean, look at wolves in the wild, to what my dog is.
Right.
And we love them, and we have these relationships. We can see. So,
and we would never eat them.
Yeah, and we would never eat them.
Some cultures do. And
Yeah.
that's always been, that was kind of one of the questions that I had to ask, is like, yeah, why do we normalize eating certain animals and then other animals we don't?
Yeah, it's a
very strange,
ultimate core kind of contradictory cognitive dissonance, discriminatory feature where it's like, well, hey, my dog would be food in many places, or at least a few places in the earth. And if that makes anyone uncomfortable, then you have to ask, well, why are we so comfortable with other species being? Because like, though we eat cows and don't eat dogs, in India, they don't eat cows. Well, they do, but they're not supposed to. That's their religion or their culture says that the cow is holy. So there's all these different cultural distinctions, which at the end of the day are just what stories that we tell ourselves when they're all so similar genetically.
Mm-hmm.
And the real important point is they're all each individuals. You know, my dog, anyone who has a pet knows that they're unique. They're like a little person. They have all these little quirks.
Absolutely,
So when we think about these big numbers, about 90 billion animals being killed, that's 90 billion individuals with unique personalities and traits and all of this. So, you know, it's heavy, but I do think there's an inspiring thing here, which is wherever you're at on your journey, if you haven't seen Christspiracy, go check out Christspiracy for sure. But you're going to have questions about what we're talking about today, but continue to ask the questions and continue to think about in what ways you are contributing or could shift your perspective on what we are consuming and what you are consuming and how that can impact others. And if we really truly want to do unto others as we would like done unto ourselves, we might reconsider some of our choices. And on that note, you know, there's so many things that we're all fighting. You're fighting with trying to expose this education system. There are people that are fighting wars, sickness, you know, inequalities, censorship, all the buzzwords of all the things. I'll tell you right now, after being someone who's concerned about all of those things, but after many, many years, why I'm so focused on this is because I believe it's a core root issue at the base of it all. Because as we show in our film Christspiracy, the genesis of the first wars was over cattle herding tribes, livestock tribes, because they were running out of resources. Like we were talking about, they were cutting down all the forests, and the cattle was eating up everything, and the use of the resources is inefficient. Rather than just eating the plants, they're eating the animals, and the animals are eating up all the plants. And so you have to go fight the other tribe to get resources, and this is how the genesis of war starts. And we have the evidence of it in our language, our ancient languages. The ancient word for war in Sanskrit is gavasti, which comes from the cow go. Gavasti means a desire for more cattle. So the word war literally meant desire for more cattle. You had to go fight your tribe to get their resources so that you could raise your herds. And big pharma and the medical system and the V word, I don't know if we can say that on here, That all started because of livestock. Our epidemic diseases come from the livestock industry. Think about it: swine flu, bird flu, mad cow.
Oh yeah.
All of it. And then these antidotes to it that we've developed. The V word that you shoot. It comes from the Latin word for cow, vacca.
Wow.
Because the first inoculations were developed on cows for cowpox to create herd immunity. So that's that industry. You've got, the issue. Another, like we were just talking about war, a big buzz thing right now is all the Nigerian Christians being killed.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up.
I made a piece on this.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of Nigerian Christians killed, and all the Christians are up in arms, but no one realizes that at the core of it, those conflicts originated over cattle land. The Muslims that are moving into the Christian territories, and it's being framed as solely a religious conflict. And don't mince my words, I do believe that there's a religious element, obviously. However, the strain that's fueling the clash is that these Fulani herders, who are traditionally Muslim, are running out of resources because they're cattle herders, and they're going into yam, yucca, rice farms led by traditionally Christian farmers to go get their resources. And there's all these stories from pastors with their churches being burned down and then the herders feeding all the crops to the cows. And this is ancient. This has been going on forever.
Wow.
So wherever you turn, this core issue, and how does it all work? It all works on supply and demand. And in that situation with the cattle herding in Nigeria, I'll straight up tell you that the USDA is in collaboration with the Nigerian government talking about exports of cattle and this and that. The Nigerian government is fueling the whole thing, providing cattle ranching land for the Fulani herders, taking it from the plant-based Christian farmers. And it's all under the guise of trying to meet World Health Organization cattle carcass consumption standards. That's like a word, like that's in one of the documents of the government for their plan, is that they're trying to meet these World Health Organization standards for carcass consumption, cow flesh consumption in Nigeria and abroad. And so they're upping that. And by all means, there is a religious element to it, as there always is, but it's because that's the whole point of Christspiracy, is it's intertwined. And we have these corruptions that enter our most sacred institutions like religion, and they're industrial and violent. And it's time, like Jesus, we turn some tables and call stuff out.
That's a literal example of our consumption is fueling wars that are happening to our Christian brothers and sisters in the world.
Yeah.
So when you ask, all jokes aside on the soy boys and all that, you look at, no, there are real consequences of what we consume.
Yeah.
That delicious barbecue, or all those steak dinners and chicken dinners and all that stuff, it creates demand on a system that has to be met. And in order to meet that demand, we've seen human tendency, anything will be done to meet that demand when there's money involved.
Absolutely.
So it's all cyclical, it's all interconnected. And when you remove yourself from that wheel, you pull yourself out from the system and you opt out and you say, I'm not going to contribute to that.
Yeah. Even
though it's all around me, I'm not going to contribute to that. I'm going to step off. And what I would say for people is don't say, oh, who am I? I'm just one person. When you step off that hamster wheel, you inspire other people to start asking questions. Maybe you're going to get some condemnation, some judgment, but ultimately how you respond to it, how you show up, is going to communicate something to everyone around you.
Yeah.
And if you inspire maybe one or two more people to do it, to step off the sacrificial system and the meat consumption system, and what if they inspire two more?
Yeah.
Then you create this ripple of change, which is what you guys have done. Like you look at Cowspiracy, What the Health, and now Christspiracy. You guys have inspired millions of people to opt out of that system, and it's having profound consequences for the good. We're seeing now all sorts of new products emerging and new technologies emerging that are making it easier to be vegetarian. Mm-hmm. We have supplements, we have more research, we have more data showing the benefits of it. Mm-hmm. You know, like I've run Ironmans completely vegan, like full-blown Ironmans. And so I've been a testament of that myself. Like, you can do it.
Right.
And I just find that to be something like I want to hopefully inspire more people to just try it.
Yeah.
Try it for a couple months, try it for a year, see how you feel. And don't blame the diet if you're not getting everything. Innovate. Right? If we can do it for years and years and years.
I'm 15 years in.
Yeah.
And I feel better than ever. People tell me, like, whoa, they get surprised when they know what my age is and everything like that. And so it's...
Yeah, they're like, wow, Cam is 73. Dang,
whoa, dude. Dude, the Essenes, by the way, Philo, that historian that I mentioned from Alexandria, mentions that the Essenes all lived to the ripe old age of 120. And they were still, like, preaching and teaching at 120. Wow. Some of them may be older, but that was, like, the average age Simon, the half-brother of Jesus, who was the follow-up after James the Just. When James the Just was martyred, Simon took over his place. Simon's documented, I think he was 110, still preaching and like resisting Roman centurions.
So he was strong.
He was strong. So I think, yeah, man, if we're going to be, we were talking about this the other day, like speaking directly to people of faith, if we're meant to be the arbiters of the kingdom of heaven on earth, we got to be strong. We can't be dying of colon cancer at freaking 40 years old. Like, I just had a brother of mine, dear brother of mine, who I used to do praise and worship with. He was one of the first bands I ever played in. And his wife is now widowed with 4 kids because he got colon cancer. And it's just so sad. And I know.
Well, you see that now with like the Liver King too. You see these cultural, like I remember when I was first going vegan vegetarian, I remember so many people would be sending me Liver King's content. And you looked at it and he was bashing vegans. I mean, like saying we're like subhuman basically,
right.
or subprimal or whatever. And you see how this pans out. Hopefully people can zoom out and see how it pans out. Yeah. The Paul Saladinos, coming out and admitting that, hey, there are some consequences to the carnivore diets, and it's not all, what you see on social media, but you see, the Liver King has health issues, I think, I've heard, and
Paul
I pray for
off.
all of them, man. It's I don't wish that upon anyone. I wish abundance. I wish life and life more abundantly. And I think, the proof is in the pudding on it,
Yeah. That non-dairy good
chia pudding. The proof is in the chia pudding.
Yeah. So good. That coconut.
Yeah.
That overnight oats.
Yeah. The proof is in it, baby. Well, I think we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
I mean, we've dived in here deep. Dove in.
We can dove in a lot deeper in a future podcast. We've only really just skimmed
the surface.
We just
kind of tickled the surface here.
Yeah, we got a lot more that
we haven't reached into the cookie jar in there, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's all kinds of breadcrumbs down there that we got to pull out.
We got to get them. But yeah, man, thank you so much, and thank you for what you've done with Christspiracy. It's such a powerful film, and I just respect people that are willing to stand for what they believe. And in a world, I've come across it myself, when you decide to put your message out there and your voice out there, and you get all of this criticism and hate, but you're willing to debate. You're willing to reach across the aisle and have those conversations, which I respect. And I pray that everybody watching this, you do the same. Just keep having conversations, even if we disagree, even if you watch this podcast and you say, no, I'm going to keep eating meat. No, it's all love. We love you. And that's not what this is about. This is about just having those conversations and trying to, meet each other at the table, really. And I thank you for that, man. I think you're a powerful voice in the space and a powerful brother that's out there in the world trying to make the world a better place.
And I reflect that right back at you. And I pray that the message that you're bringing to the world really adjudicates these people into understanding how important it is for our younger generations to be properly educated and
Absolutely, yeah.
how much of a core issue that is, in terms of.
Well, it's all connected when you look at like the food pyramid.
Yeah.
And you look at all these things, all these posters that were up in school, in public school. We were programmed to eat a specific way. When you go to the cafeteria, you're not taught to question, hey, where did that come from? How did this get here? It's Gordon Food Services that just showed up, this greasy cookie, greasy pizza, those Bosco sticks that are fire. You start eating all that stuff. You're not taught to question that.
No, bro.
You just look at that food pyramid and you're like, I see some Fruity Pebbles up on that.
Yeah, they give you that square piece of pizza with some chocolate milk and say, hush and eat it, boy.
Eat up, son. Eat up and get back to math class.
Put that ranch dressing on there.
Yeah.
That's
what we're brought up into that culture. That's why I don't have any judgment for people. I was brought up in that same culture. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I got
the double chocolate milk.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I can't. You crack open that box. Ooh.
Oh,
get those lips on that wet paper and.
Shout out Oatly chocolate milk. We got an alternative.
Yeah, we have alternatives to all this stuff. That's a beautiful aspect of it. And those alternatives are getting better.
Yeah.
I think like you saw like a lot of people like Beyond Meat and all these things have a lot of chemicals and like seed oils and stuff.
Some hits and some misses.
But yeah, I see it's innovating. Yeah. There's more and more options. There's more ways to get protein. Like there's this brand called Meaty. That's just mushroom. It's like mushroom chicken, but all it is mushrooms and salt, and it has like 30 plus grams of protein in like 2 little patties.
There you go.
It's like $8 at Whole Foods.
Yeah.
So it's like comparable price to meat.
Right.
More protein in some cases.
Yeah.
So it just takes that commitment, the awareness, and that's what this is really about. Just having those conversations and increasing our awareness.
Yeah.
So thank you, man. Appreciate you.
And everybody go check out Christspiracy if you can, Christspiracy.com.
And go follow Kameron Waters. That's his personal IG at Christspiracy. I'll drop all that information in the description. And reach out to Cam too. If you guys have specific questions, if you've watched this and you have some deeper questions that you want to, maybe challenge Cam, please do. He's more than happy to have a friendly jest.
Absolutely. All day, every day.
All right, brother. Let's get you to the airport.
Okay. Take care, brother.
All right. See you.